Alright, I'm curious. Taylor Lorenz uploaded this video called Websites That Everyone Hates, that might save the internet, which is, she had 4chan in the thumbnail, so I imagine we're gonna see some really, really spicy takes in this one. I mean, it's more Taylor Lorenz slop for what it's worth.
My job is to defend their civil rights, because if their civil rights can be taken away, then so can the civil rights of every other American citizen.
A few months ago, the UK's Online Safety Act went into effect, causing absolute chaos across the internet. Overnight, UK regulators blocked internet users' access from everything to Spotify playlists to SpongeBob SquarePants GIFs.
Whoa. So, the UK Online Safety Act, I'm pretty sure... Listen, the last time I've seen Taylor Lorenz talk about an Online Safety Act was the Kids Online Safety Act, and she was heavily against that, and I feel like the only reason why was because in an old content cop, not made by iDubbbz, but an old content cop, back in 2020, this guy made a hit piece, and it was actually a pretty good hit piece against Taylor Lorenz. It really demonstrated how she would interview minors without their parental consent. She wasn't trying to, like, sexually exploit kids or anything, but she was, like, it was a very huge, invasive boundary. Like, it was invasive of their boundaries, is what I mean to say. So, I would need to educate myself on the UK's Online Safety Act. I heard some people were, like, kind of mixed about it. I guess I'll look into it. Okay, what the fuck? Reading through the official gov.uk website, the Online Safety Act 2023 is a new set of laws that protects children and adults online. It puts a range of new duties on social media companies and search services, making them more responsible for their users' safety on their platforms. Taylor... like, not for nothing, but you're 2 for 2 now. Like, historically, Taylor has voiced her negative opinions on the Children's Online Safety Act in, like, America because she thinks that it is, terrible for... I guess she can't interview minors without parental consent that way. I feel like that's the real reason why she's against it, and she, like, pretends like she isn't. And now she's against, like, more safety for children online. Okay, that's a very weird hill to die on, Miss Taylor Lorenz, but alright.
Information about things like Joe Biden's police funding plan was restricted, along with posts about
Is that even true? I don't even think that's true. I don't think Joe Biden's police funding was even restricted.
Up-and-coming political party in the UK. Police violence videos were wiped from the internet. The subreddit...
Wait. UK users need to post selfie or photo ID to view Reddit's r/Israel crimes and r/Ukraine war footage.
For war crimes was blocked, and dozens of forums for everything from new motherhood advice to Alcoholics Anonymous treatment was blocked. The online...
Why the fuck would kids need to see, like, videos of people getting their limbs blowed off online? Like, why do you think that would need to be, like, a thing that people need to watch online? Yeah, okay, that's probably what it's, like, getting rid of.
Safety Act even prevented gamers from tweaking colors in games like Minecraft with...
Wait, what the fuck is this? Okay, so breaking. Zoomers cannot adjust their NVIDIA graphics card settings without their gaming PCs anymore because they aren't 18 thanks to the Online Safety Act. Okay, I don't know. Maybe, if there's like aren't there like ways to like prove that you could be like... Aren't there ways you can prove that like you have parental consent or something? Or that like you have a parent with you that's like willing to use this with you? I don't fucking know. Like, I mean, obviously, like, you shouldn't be able to restrict using, like, the NVIDIA app, because that's, like, a gaming thing, so that's fine, but I don't know, dude. Like, I feel like...
Without uploading their government ID.
This is just, like, a random fucking Twitter post.
While the big tech companies rolled over and complied with the law, a small but unlikely group of platforms is fighting back. These platforms include Kiwi Farms, Gab, and 4chan.
Oh, you're such a hack, Taylor. Bro, she's saying that 4chan and Kiwi Farms are gonna be the saviors for this Online Safety Act, even though that they've been known for relentlessly doxing people in the past and for, like, lolcow content in the past. Wow. Incredible, Taylor. That's, we're really starting off the framing in this video very deceptively.
And they're waging a legal battle that could reshape the entire global internet. Preston Byrne is a lawyer representing these platforms in their fight against the UK government. A fierce free speech defender, Preston is making the case that UK and EU regulators do not have the legal right to censor the speech of Americans in America. Today, he's joining me to discuss the global...
Yeah, well, I don't think they are censoring the speech in America. That's why they called it the UK Online Safety Act. So, like, I don't know. And also, can't they just, like, use a VPN to bypass it anyways? Like, I like, I don't know, like that shit seems like it's not that difficult to bypass. Technology can do anything these days.
Battle he's undertaken and how some of the worst websites online might just save the internet for all of us.
Great. The websites that are known for ruthlessly doxing people. Though I guess Taylor Lorenz is very synonymous with like the H3 snark community, so I don't think she cares too much when it comes to doxing, only when it fits her agenda.
Preston, welcome.
Thanks, great to be here.
Okay, I'm so excited to talk to you. Longtime follower online. I don't know how I found your Twitter account, but I feel like everything you post, I'm like, yes, retweet, retweet. You are such a fierce defender of free speech. So can you tell me a little bit about kind of how you got involved in this world of like international free speech defense? And like, where did this all begin, this sort of battle between, I guess, these American tech companies and these foreign governments?
Don't you guys find it ironic that Taylor Lorenz advocates for free speech, but if you go to her Twitter page right now and try to respond to one of her tweets, you won't be able to because she locks all of her replies. So you're for freedom of speech until people attempt to reply to any of your tweets calling you out for massive disinformation. Okay, that's chill.
In Europe especially.
Yeah, sure. So the fight began in some really dark and strange corners of the internet after Donald Trump was elected president in 2016. So when that occurred, there was kind of a great reckoning in the sort of middle and left of American society. And that's really where a lot of the censorship came from, to be blunt, because back in 2015-16, the internet was a very anarchic place. And so what happened was this.
Yeah, no shit. You had people like fucking Leafy is here and like the commentary community is just like pretty much saying whatever the fuck you want. There was hardly any regulations on YouTube. Yeah, no shit, it was chaotic.
Started trying to regulate all kinds of online platforms. So you saw an increase in content moderation to companies like Meta, then Facebook, Twitter, now X, Google, Microsoft, etc. I always had an interest in free speech. When I was a lawyer in England, I've been a lawyer in England since 2011, and so over there I was very interested in the topic. And then I moved back to America, and I saw that the censorship that was very much a rising tide in the UK was also a rising tide in the United States. So we started representing.
Well, not for the reasons that you think. Only for the fact that like Trump is like having people like Kash Patel arrest people for having like a pride flag on their desk, and like if you say something Trump doesn't like, then he'll like arrest you and like do shit to you. So like obviously like we are moving towards like a fascist country if you want to have a conversation about that, yes. But the whole point of this video is that the Kids Online Safety Act is bad because kids can't view graphic material or they can't view war crimes. Like, yeah, Taylor, you cited a fucking subreddit that's dedicated to posting a bunch of, like, war crimes and videos that are graphic from war. Like, I don't think kids necessarily need to see how graphic war is online. Like, obviously, kids in Palestine witness it every day. And I think people in the UK and the US are very fortunate not to see that, so like I don't think that's entirely necessary, and the fact that Taylor Lorenz thinks that's problematic is beyond me. Like she totally cares about kids' online safety, clearly.
Smaller companies that had problems.
But obviously she doesn't, because she fucking was interviewing minors without their consent back in like 2020. She wasn't trying to like sexually exploit them, but like it's still like a huge violation of boundaries.
With the US government and also with deplatforming around 2018, and I've been tracking that issue for since before then. One company in particular, Gab.com, which was sort of the bête noire of the American online safety and trust and safety community, they started getting inbound from the German government, specifically the German Ministry for Justice, the BFJ. And the BFJ was trying to enforce a law which was kind of a predecessor to the EU Digital Services Act called the Network Enforcement Act, or the NetzDG. And so they usually only targeted big companies. So they went after Google, Facebook, whatever else. And at the time, Gab had almost no users. It had something like 500,000 registered users, maybe 15,000 MAUs. And they got a letter from the BFJ saying, oh, you need to come over here. You need to set up a registered office, and you need to start following German censorship law. And if you don't do that, we're going to fine you 30,000 euros because we have global jurisdiction over the internet. And Gab...
Hold on a second. Okay, so I spent a really long time like trying to fact check this. I put this in Google Gemini because I tried Grok at first, but Grok was taking forever. So I was like, all right, I'll just do Google Gemini instead. And basically, Google Gemini essentially talks about how there's a lot of parts of the article that this is his name Peyton or whatever, the guy that Taylor Lorenz has on. There's like a lot of like weird oversimplifications of the article that he cited. I knew there was something like very fishy about the article that he was citing. There was something like very weird about it. And I think the biggest part of it is the fact that like the claim about Facebook and the anti-lockdown deletions. Facebook deleted 150 accounts belonging to an anti-lockdown movement at behest of the German government. In September 2021, Facebook, now Meta, did remove a network of accounts linked to Care Denkin. I'm sorry if I butchered that. It's part of the lateral thinking movement. Meta stated this was due to tons of misinformation about health and inciting violence. So the German government did that. So that is what one of the things I do want to talk about is this other article I have pulled up here about censorship in Germany. Now, censorship in Germany has not been new. Like it's existed during like the Empire, and then of course during World War I, and then World War II, infamously, with like the whole Nazi Germany and the propaganda that they were running. Germany still has censorship laws, but like they're not as like much of a like I don't want to say they're like as much of a huge threat to freedom of speech as the video, as fucking Taylor Lorenz and like the other guy is making it out to be, because a lot of the censorship is for like hate speech and like child pornography and stuff, which is probably a good thing to have censorship on a lot of these things. And I think this last paragraph is something that caught my attention. So Germany's historical journey with censorship laws has not only shaped its domestic landscape, but has also had implications for the broader European and global context. Germany's experiences, particularly during periods like Nazi rule, serve as a cautionary tale on the fragility of free expression in the face of authoritarian regimes. Notably, the commitment to free speech by Germany in its post-war constitution has influenced broader European norms and has contributed to the region's collective emphasis on democratic values. Furthermore, on the global stage, Germany's current approach to censorship, especially in the digital age, sets an example for other nations dealing with similar challenges. The implementation of laws from the Network Enforcement Act reflect Germany's proactive stance in addressing online hate speech and disinformation. So, generally speaking, the only conclusion I can come to is that Taylor Lorenz and this other guy like fucking hate it because they're not able to freely spread disinformation. And it's like, we know that Taylor Lorenz is like incredibly fucking dishonest when it comes to her portrayal of information. So like, I just knew there was something so fishy about some of the articles that they were showing us earlier. So I'm glad I was able to check this and realize that there's actually a lot more if you just look into it.
I've told them to go to hell, to be blunt. And the Biden administration was actually assisting the German government in serving those notices, initially actually under Trump 1.
Good! Disinformation on child porn is bad, and hate speech is bad. Good! Good! If they're actively trying to get rid of that, then that's fine. Like, that's good. Like, listen, I am all for freedom of speech, but there comes a point where I'm not going to feel sorry when they're getting rid of these things.
That was happening just as a matter of course. Then under the Biden administration, I got involved and we started pushing back on those notices a little bit, asking the DOJ, to not serve them because it was violating my client's constitutional rights. And then when Trump...
Why? How? How is it violating your client's rights? Does your client have, like, child porn on them or something? What the fuck?
Came around, we called up the House of Representatives.
This doesn't make any sense to me. None of this makes any fucking sense to me. There's something so fucking off about this.
And a couple of people in the DOJ, we let them know this was happening, and lo and behold, the notices from Germany stopped getting served. So this is something which has really only been a problem for a handful of the most controversial American companies. And what happened was you saw it being prototyped with the NetzDG. The NetzDG was not a very successful global regulatory regime for the internet. It was not widely adopted. It's since been...
You literally just cited an article where NetzDG is wrong. Well, actually, okay, all right, hold on a second. Okay, so it does seem like there is like a legitimate conversation to have here about like censorship. Like regarding like maybe satire or whatever, and like let's just say like I don't know, you're like having a history lesson about like Nazism and like that gets censored. I think there are legitimate conversations to have about it, but like the general intent of the law is to make it so people can't like freely throw around like child porn or fucking hate speech or whatever. Which is a step in the right direction. I do think it's a little bit strange that, like, Germany is, like, trying to, like, run these laws, and, like, their age of consent is, like, 14 or something. The reason I know that is because I did a fucking video on the Dead by Daylight controversy a while back of somebody who lived in Germany. There was, like, a whole conversation about it, but anyways, just so fucking weird. I don't know, man. Like, okay. I mean, I guess this article that Taylor Lorenz cited was a little more accurate after looking into it a little more, I guess, but okay.
Successful global regulatory regime for the internet. It was not widely adopted. It's since been largely superseded by the EU Digital Services Act. But that was their experimentation lab where they tried some of these things out. And so we knew from that process, and in fact, we can talk about that in a second, but I now represent all of the American targets of the UK Online Safety Act. And we told them, we said, listen, thanks for sending your enforcement notices. I know you're new to this, but this isn't our first rodeo. We've seen this movie before. And
I wonder if this guy, I mean, for all I know, this guy could be like well-intentioned with it, but like, I don't know, like there was an article that was cited. I mean, I guess Taylor Lorenz is like editing articles or has like her editor, if she even hires an editor, or maybe Taylor Lorenz edits it herself. I don't know. But like, I obviously know that Taylor Lorenz only cares about the Kids Online Safety Act because she just wants to be able to fucking interview minors without their parental consent.
Last time
I wonder if this guy knows about that, but he probably doesn't because he doesn't strike me as like a super terminally online guy.
Germans tried to do this, we just kind of dismissed them, and they never got into the United States, and neither will you.
You mentioned 2018 is when this first started. I feel like this is when you started to see a lot of moral panic, especially in the media over speech, where when you started out, it was like you would report on these platforms, and then you started to get all this, like, I don't know, I don't want to say pressure, but I feel like the media sentiment changed. You saw the beginning of the techlash, and there was just a huge amount of public desire.
I don't know anything about that.
For articles about sort of like, look at this bad stuff. There's the misinformation crisis. Like, we need to censor the internet and sort of, I guess.
What?
The misinformation.
Study. On Twitter, false news travels faster than true stories. Research projects finds humans, not bots, are primarily responsible for the spread of leading misinformation. Okay, that's probably true. Because, like, there are a lot of bots on Twitter. This was back in, like, 2018. It's still a problem even today.
Information crisis. Like, we need to censor the internet and sort of, I guess, curtail speech online.
What? Russia meddled in all big social media around. Okay, Taylor, we're not about to get into this conversation. We're not about to get into this fucking like, shut up. Like, it's verified. You can go on FBI.gov's website. I've already verified it in past videos. That like Russia had like an interference with an election in the 2016 election. Like, that, why do you think Trump had his fucking son meet with Kremlin lawyers from Russia to try to get him elected? Not to mention, Trump it also was, like, running the narrative that Ukraine started the fucking war in Russia. Like, Taylor, like, we're not about to have this fucking conversation.
Because otherwise...
I guess it makes sense that Taylor Lorenz is also running this narrative because Hassan also downplayed Russia invading Ukraine and, like, was saying that the invasion was... he, like, said that the invasion of Crimea... He labeled it as Crimea River.
We'll get Russian disinformation or something on Facebook. But I feel like a lot of it didn't pick up in the EU.
Hassan doesn't care about it, which is a guy that you are massively fucking obsessed with.
Until, like, more recent years. The Online Safety Act, I guess, passed in 2023, but went into effect in 2024. Can you talk about, like, when the Online Safety Act went into effect in the UK recently, kind of how that affected speech on these American social platforms?
Sure. So the Online Safety Act started out as the Online Harms Bill in 2019. And then I think they ran some linguistic analysis on the name and decided they didn't want to call it online harms. So they called it online safety because that was better packaging for it. The Online Safety Act really requires companies to do three essential things. One of them is it requires them to produce risk assessments of content, on their site and assess their compliance with the substantive provisions of the act. And then
which, by the way, includes like what Taylor brought up earlier with the fucking subreddits of like showing war crimes that are happening in Israel as well as Russia and Ukraine war, of people getting like fucking hurt. I doubt that kids need to see on the ground footage of something that's very traumatizing because secondhand trauma is a real thing. We don't need kids seeing that. I think it's probably for the better that they don't. Same for child porn. Again, like, I think the intention for the Kids Online Safety Act is good. The flaws are mainly for like the AI age verification, I think, on YouTube specifically, because I know YouTube was, like, implementing that, and there's, like, a lot of flaws with that, because, like, AI is far from perfect, and that could interfere with adults in the way that they view content, and maybe the AI could mistake, like, a grown adult as, like, a fucking young child or something. I don't know. Like, it's far from perfect if you're just getting AI and not a human to review it. So, I think there are legitimate conversations to have here, but I cannot trust Taylor's interpretation of information given like some of the shit that she cited earlier. And like she literally cited fucking Russia, like disinformation about like I guess the Russian-Ukraine war.
To the regulator on what, how they've complied, what the chief risks are, and how they plan on ameliorating those risks. That includes all kinds of subsidiary requirements, like if they make a substantial change to the design of the application, they need to report that to the regulator and do a risk assessment on the change. The second thing is that it requires proactive removal of so-called priority illegal content, which includes things like CSAM and other stuff that is also illegal in the United States, but also includes...
It's probably a good thing that CSAM is illegal. I think it should probably stay that way.
Things that are perfectly legal in the United States, particularly under their terrorism statutes. And the third thing it does...
Wait, what was that?
It's things like CSAM and other stuff that is also illegal in the United States, but also includes things that are perfectly legal in the United States, particularly under their terrorism statutes.
Hold on. The act requires companies to take... Okay. I mean, it would make sense for companies to implement these kinds of policies, no? Maybe Preston is talking specifically about how the companies censor it, I guess?
Really under their terrorism statutes. And the third thing it does, it then says, okay, well, in addition to that, you have to, on a notice and takedown basis, remove any content which is illegal, right?
Okay, good. Who wants fucking child porn online? Good.
Violates any real-world law, which is not the case in the United States, covers a great deal of constitutionally protected content, and also infringes on these companies' rights as distributors of third-party content to not be held liable for that content, which is both a First Amendment principle, right, under Smith v. California, but it's also a statutory principle under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. It doesn't give the regulator power to intrude and actually demand that these things get taken down. But what happens is if you are in violation enough, what it does is the regulator says you violated some amorphous duty that we have imposed on you through our regulations and codes of practice that are promulgated under the Act. And as a consequence of that, you have to pay hefty fines and penalties. Or if you just don't respond to us, as my clients haven't, we could throw you in prison over it because you failed to respond to our regulatory inquiries. So what we've seen is that companies have overcorrected, right? In the sense that they know, in order to avoid this fine, what they've done is they've cut off access to all kinds of lawful speech for adults. And so Substack, for example, has put up age verification technology on... I mean, Substack. I've never read anything offensive on Substack in my entire...
Sure, and you know what? Like, listen, I am open to the conversation about, like, how the age verification process is bad. I don't think the age verification process, like, in theory is a bad thing, but, like, a lot of the problems, and especially on YouTube, they were doing this, is they were using, like, AI face verification, which is problematic, and that like gets into like a separate conversation about AI in general being like super problematic and just not perfect when it comes to verifying somebody's face. But like, again, like generally speaking, like the intention with the Kids Online Safety Act is like for the most part a good thing. Like I highly doubt that the internet as a whole is getting censored entirely. Like, you still see shit on the internet all the fucking time. Besides which, the age verification thing is, like, very easy to bypass anyways, so it's, like, legally it might be there, but, like, it's just not really... Like, I don't think it really is gonna have, like, a large effect in the grand scheme of things.
Life. And they have to put up age gating, right, on content that might be offensive to someone who's under the age of 18 because it deals with touchy political subject matter.
I thought it was specifically for kids under the age of 13. Wasn't that the original Online Safety Act anyways?
And so that infringes on the First Amendment in two ways. One of them, it infringes on the British people's God-given right to free speech, right? But the UK has the right to do what it wants within its own borders.
The UK doesn't have the First Amendment. What the frick are you talking about?
But
they have, like, a different... laws according to their parliament. I'm not like the most educated on UK law, so I could be wrong, but like I feel like that. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, this is me kind of like playing semantics a little bit, so it really doesn't matter like that much, but like technically the UK doesn't have a First Amendment. They have like their own freedom of expression laws, but it's not like the US's First Amendment, so I was right on that.
Infringes on American speech because it requires Americans to account for their editorial decisions to the UK. And in addition to that, it requires them to put in place barriers that prevent them and other Americans from talking to the UK. And the UK is free to do it.
Sounds like a bit of an adjustment period that people will have to go through, I guess. I don't know.
It wants within its own borders. They can put a censorship box, on the pipes leading into the country and on the tubes, right? And they can say...
I don't really think the censorship is really that huge, considering the fact that, like, kids are not going to be viewing articles regarding the, whatchamacallit, the fucking like dark topics that are for adults anyways. So like I highly doubt you're going to be catching kids reading this shit anyways. Also, I'm pretty sure the Kids Online Safety Act applies to people that are 13 and under. I could be wrong though. I'm pretty sure that's what I read though. Oh, okay. This explains what I was getting it confused with. Okay, so the it is under 18, so I guess I was wrong on that part. But the part that I was getting it confused with, I believe, was the 13 and under part, which applies to COPPA, which was a thing that happened way back in the day. This was when I was still in high school, is when they passed this. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which has been the standard for in the US for decades. That's why when you upload a YouTube video, right, and you see that little option that says, is this video made for kids or is this video not made for kids, you're forced to answer that question. It's because YouTube has to comply with that law legally. To say if it is for children over 13 or under 13. So that's why YouTube has that specifically, which that makes sense. And also that hasn't really inhibited free speech, like, whatsoever. Because, like, who the fuck, like, I certainly don't need children that are 13 and under viewing my videos. Like, I'm not trying to appeal to a target audience of kids anyway, so it really doesn't matter that much in the grand scheme of things. But, okay, sure, alright.
Listen, we're going to block URLs that we find objectionable or block domains that we find objectionable. But what they don't have a right to do is to come over to the United States and tell an American what server configurations they need to set on their servers. And that's exactly what they're doing. So essentially, if you talk to someone in the UK about it, they say, well, they're operating in the UK if their website is accessible here. And that's just not congruent with what traditionally has been understood as operating in a place, right, actually means, which usually means premises, equipment, people, that kind of stuff. What the UK is saying, if your website is visible in the UK, right, which every website is, as long as you've got an internet connection, then you have to follow their content moderation rules. And essentially that means that their expectation, as they've put in lots and lots of different correspondence that they've sent and is stated in the law itself, is that these rules have extraterritorial effect and it governs the conduct of American citizens on American soil.
So can you...
I mean, that would make sense considering the internet isn't just for the United States of government. Like, anyone can access the internet, so, like, it makes sense that the US would translate their policies, or specifically, like, a lot of companies in the US that, like, write for articles or forums online would have to translate that somehow into the UK law. And that can really, like, obviously, like, yes, there's a conversation about it going too far, but I highly doubt that we're going to see any, like, massive ramifications from this. I mean, like, the Kids Online Safety Act is generally, like, intentioned to try not to make kids view anything that they can get a secondhand trauma from.
Explain the difference between that and all these other countries that are also very censorious. Like, you'll see a lot of people I saw on
Okay, I love the fucking narrative that Taylor is running here. Great.
Twitter of them being like, well, what about like Iran or Russia or some of these other countries, I guess, that have very authoritarian control over speech? Why is...
It's crazy because your goat Hassan Parker loves Russia and tried to downplay Russia invading Ukraine, so that's interesting.
The Online Safety Act in the UK is such a problem, but the sort of authoritarian laws in those other countries are not.
I mean, they are a problem, right, for people in Russia. The problem is the UK is making it a problem for people in the United States. And so, you know, Russia has not ever threatened any of my clients with prison time for exercising their First Amendment rights. That is no longer true of the UK. As I said, I represent 4 companies, all Americans, that have been targeted by the Online Safety Act, and every single one has been threatened with fines and prison time for activity which is conducted and carried out wholly and entirely on U.S. soil, but which the UK is now purporting to have jurisdiction over. And when challenged on that, they have persisted, right? They've done that in their pleadings. They've done that in correspondence that they've sent. They've said that the First Amendment doesn't apply on U.S. soil. So it's a really big problem. And the UK is trying to project its sovereign authority into the United States. And I think Americans are quite right to push back. And so, someone was tweeting about this today and they said, oh, Preston, you're being really unfair. You're comparing the UK with Russia. To be blunt, Russia's not a problem for any of my clients.
I've seen censorship demands from the UK. Okay, I mean, Russia is definitely engaging in a level of censorship. That's not anything new necessarily. I was a little iffy about this Preston Byrne person or whatever his name is. But based on what I've seen about him, he seems well-intentioned. He probably doesn't know that Taylor has ulterior motives when it comes to being on her video. And it certainly wouldn't be the first time. I mean, Taylor did that with that one person when she was covering the Ethan Klein lawsuit. And she also did that when it came to, like, the fucking Emru assault thing or whatever. And it's just like, Taylor Lorenz is not exactly the most credible journalist, so that's why I'm... excuse me if maybe I'm being, like, a little bit too skeptical in this video, but that's kind of why. Because Taylor Lorenz has a history of being extremely dishonest.
Problem for any of my clients. Russia's not threatening them. The UK is. And so we go where the fight is, and right now the fight is with the United Kingdom because the UK is the country that's trying to take my clients' First Amendment rights away.
Well, so let's talk about some of your clients, because I think people might be kind of interested to know the different effects that these laws have on especially smaller platforms, because I feel like we all hear about the harms of Meta or Google or whatever, but, you know, those do not represent sort of the totality of the social web. And so I know you represent Kiwi Farms, 4chan. Tell me, like, kind of about your client roster.
Well, that's shady. I mean, I don't know. If that's who he's representing, that's a little uncomfortable given the fact that 4chan and Kiwi Farms don't exactly have the cleanest history. They've been known in a lot of doxing campaigns, and they've been synonymous with, like, Encyclopedia Dramatica and a bunch of, like, weird lolcows online. So, I don't know. That makes me a little uncomfortable. For all I know, maybe it could be for a good cause. I haven't really seen anything too bad about this Preston Byrne person.
Yeah, so these are the big bads of the global internet. These are the websites where when you talk to a disinformation activist or someone who believes in content moderation, they will usually point to these websites as one of the worst things on the planet. You know, the root of all evil, et cetera, and they'll say it's a terrible place.
It absolutely is a terrible place. They've been known in a lot of very degenerate things historically.
Let's not beat around the bush. These are very controversial websites. It's Kiwi Farms, Gab.com, 4chan.org, and SASU, which is a mental health discussion forum where people are allowed to discuss certain subject matter I'm not going to talk about here so you don't get demonetized. And so essentially, these are very controversial websites. And that is why they were selected as the initial target set by the UK, because I think they assumed that either they wouldn't be able to afford competent representation or that no lawyer would be willing to defend them. And for the most part, that's true. I think if you worked in a major law firm, particularly one with a transatlantic presence, one in the US and one in the UK, the likelihood that you could get one of these clients through a management committee, process and onboarding, even if they could pay, to say nothing of pro bono, is close to zero because of the risk profile. But when you're a free speech lawyer, right, in Skokie, they defended the Nazis, right? That's the job of the free speech lawyer, is to go out to the perimeter and defend the test cases where they're trying to prove the principle that the First Amendment doesn't exist. For me, that was a red rag to a bull, and I was like, all right, let's go, let's get it on. And so I mean, I'm not going to defend the content that's on these sites, right? That's not my job. My job is to defend their civil rights. That's the job, because...
Oh, I guess that makes sense from a lawyer standpoint. I guess.
If their civil rights can be taken away, then so can the civil rights of every other American citizen.
I think that's something that I really want people to understand. I've been targeted so aggressively by Kiwi Farms.
Didn't you, go after Ethan and accuse him of pedophilia for an out-of-context clip? You're also very synonymous with Snark, so I really don't think you have any room to be talking here.
This resulted in my parents being swatted multiple times and other fun things.
Yeah, and so did Ethan on his family and his kids from the Snark spaces that you hang out in, because the fucking Snark spaces made up a lie saying that his kids rolled around in dog shit. It's not a justifiable reason to call CPS on him.
Yeah, some of these websites are bad, right? We don't like the content on there.
Except if it's a means to an end to go after Ethan Klein. Mm-hmm.
But as you said, they always start with ones like that. They're never going to start with some website that's beloved, that's, just for people to talk about, some social network to talk about, kittens or something. They always go for these sort of sites that people have no empathy for or no sympathy for, right? They're just yeah, shut that down. That is bad. And then, as you said, once they set that principle in place, it's going to be expanded out to everything else. So can you tell me a little bit about this legal journey? When did you start representing them? And then how have you and your clients kind of waged, this fight against the UK government?
Free speech is a very, very small part of my practice. I'm a head of legal for a private company, but also I have a small law firm on the side for a couple of clients that I've worked with for a really long time. So this censorship issue was not really on my radar too much when it started in early 2025, but I started hearing about it. Initially it was Gab, and then I got connected with everybody else because I said, who's the only lawyer who actually is, willing to deal with this and go toe to toe with the UK? And there are not many of us, to be blunt. And so, we had to make a decision pretty early on. What are we going to do about this? Are we going to fight this really, really robustly and try to build a record, make a case? And ultimately, you're never going to win as a solo practitioner. You're not going to win against the nation state by sending, stupid emails. But you can win against the nation state by getting the attention of the government. And so what we did is we decided that what we were going to do was build a record and try to provoke the UK into saying really politically radioactive things that we could then forward to Congress and the executive branch to inform them exactly what was going on. And so that's pretty much exactly what we did. And so we got a hold of the House Judiciary Committee. The way we got a hold of them was that I found a phone number on a letter that they'd sent to Keir Starmer asking him to testify. And I called that phone number and I said, okay, hey, I don't know where this mailbox goes, but I'm the guy getting the censorship notices from UK Ofcom. Please call me back if anyone's interested. And 15 minutes later, I got a call back from a staffer saying, oh my God, please, yes. And that started a process where we were connected to relevant individuals in the US government. Later, several state governments got involved. And so we created a pipeline where anything that was coming into the United States, and the UK didn't know we were doing this, although we told them. I don't think they really understood the extent to which we were doing it. We said, listen, we're copying the government on this. You should be aware. And I'm sure they read it and said, yeah, some small-time solo practitioner. No. So we were copying about a dozen government inboxes on every single letter that's been coming into the United States for the better part of 10 months, which means that the United States was able to see the escalating nature of the censorship campaign, and also they were able to sort fact from fiction in terms of the representations that were being made by the UK about like, for example, they'd say, well, no, this is just about protecting kids, right? And then they went after Gab, which is 18 plus, no adult content, edgy political content to be sure, but not a website which is a porn website, right? So
Okay, so we kind of briefly saw it earlier, but Gab appears to be this website where it's freedom of speech, all First Amendment speech is protected, so doesn't sound like they go against hate speech. So even if you spew out like hate speech on this app, it seems like it would be okay. Like, obviously in theory freedom of speech is a good thing, but it's like there are things that people say that you shouldn't say, right? Like, obviously we don't want like hate speech, and you know, like that's the reason why we see regulations on all these other apps in general. I've never even heard about Gab before like this video, so I guess that's like an interesting thing to look at, I guess.
They were running it every time the US would send a delegation over to the UK would say, no, it has nothing to do with political content. Well, they picked a lot of highly political targets that are not pornography websites, for example, in order to prove the principle. So the US was then able to determine, right, I presume, I don't have insight into their internal process, but judging what we've seen from the State Department recently, my hunch is that they were able to then parse fact from fiction here and say, okay, we have a really clear understanding of what's happening. In addition to that, 4chan and Kiwi Farms decided to sue the UK. And that lawsuit, obviously we have claims and defenses. They have claims and defenses. That's going back and forth. I don't want to talk about it too much because, it's still ongoing. But part of the purpose of that suit was to educate the wider American bar in a format that American lawyers can understand and ingest, chiefly a complaint and legal filings, and to explain to them exactly what's going on, exactly what's happening, exactly what our defenses are, exactly what the issues are with defending this kind of foreign intrusion, chiefly that the foreign government is going to immediately run for the cover of the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act to try to wriggle its way out of accountability in an American court, and to tell both the American bar and Congress, listen, we need major law reform if these kinds of requests are expected to escalate, if we're going to give American litigators and the American system and the American courts the appropriate tooling with which to fight back. And we also drafted, as part of that, we drafted a law which has been filed, or a bill, which has since been filed in the state of Wyoming. It's called the Granite Act, like granite, like the rock. And that's a censorship shield bill, which addresses a lot of these issues from a structural point of view. And, I'm reliably informed that that's been ingested in DC. And I know for facts, because, Senator Eric Schmidt has said so publicly, that a censorship shield bill is forthcoming. I don't know what's in it. I'm hoping that the bones of what we proposed are in it. And if that's the case, then it's going to become very, very difficult if we get a law like that on the books for a foreign censor to start to enforce its orders on U.S. soil.
Okay, I mean, that's probably a good thing. I mean, like, listen, here's what we have so far, right? We've got the laws, right, for children's safety online. I think in theory that's a good thing overall, to like make it so that like kids shouldn't be able to view things that are like, I don't know, like the Israel fucking war crimes or the Ukraine war crimes. I think children probably don't need to see that in particular. I mean, I guess some people could make an argument that it's more of like an issue with parents needing to watch their children more, and I'm open to those arguments. Like, I really am. I think it's a bit of a weird, difficult line to toe of like whether it's how much of it should we be censoring from kids versus how much of it should we be allowing kids to see, or how much of this can bleed into adults trying to view content elsewhere, right, online. So I am open to, like, other arguments. I just think that the intention of both what Preston is doing and the actual Online Safety Act is, like, generally, like, a good thing, but it just seems like it's, the general argument that Preston is, like, pushing is that it's going too far. And I guess that, if that's the argument he's pushing, then I think that makes more sense.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. I guess, can you tell me a little bit about what happened with these sanctions? So news broke right around Christmas that the U.S. government, State Department, was imposing sanctions on a slew of individuals for essentially trying to censor Americans. Can you talk about kind of who those individuals were and why is the State Department sanctioning UK and European figures, I guess, over these speech concerns?
Alright, time to fact check again. Holy fuck, dude, Taylor Lorenz is so unbelievably dishonest, and I'm very glad I looked into this. I don't think Marco Rubio is a good person, by the way. I think he's extremely corrupt in the Secretary of State in Trump's administration, and I hate to give him credit here, but specifically, for far too long, ideologues in Europe have led to organized efforts to coerce American platforms to punish American viewpoints that they oppose. At no point in this article, if you actually read through this PBS article, right, it's called US Bars 5 Europeans, right? If you read through this article, right, at no point does it ever imply that the US put the sanctions on to, like, censor speech whatsoever. That's not at all what the article was implying. The sanctions are specifically in response to the alleged foreign efforts to censor Americans. Again, I hate to give Marco Rubio credit here, but this was done to combat the opposition against freedom of speech. You could honestly argue even to a fault. Like, why do you think Twitter allows white supremacists to run rampant? Like, if Taylor is going to stand up for freedom of speech, do it fucking properly and stop lying about every single thing. I don't get it. Why can't Taylor just tell the fucking truth and do proper journalism? I don't understand it. Like, she has to lie about every single fucking thing that she talks about.
I can't speak for the State Department. I have no visibility into what their internal process is.
Oh, that's so funny. Oh my god, he's actually, like, this honestly tells me that Preston does have a little bit of credibility. I wasn't so sure about him when we started this video because Taylor tends to put on some people that are not super great and are a little bit incompetent. Like that one cat person in the fucking TwitchCon Emaru thing that she did. And then, like, the, lawsuits against Ethan Klein, that person was a little bit incompetent. But this actually tells me that this person actually is, like, reliable with his, like, information. Like, that actually is so funny that Taylor tried to be dishonest and he, like, completely is just, like, more responsible with it. Oh my gosh.
On that, my understanding is that these individuals work for nonprofit organizations, and we know for a fact that these nonprofit organizations work hand in glove with European regulators, and really the function that they serve is a targeting mechanism. They advise European regulators what the pressure points are in the American system, which companies should be targeted, what kind of content needs to be taken down, which companies are the biggest violators. They hand dossiers of information to those regulators, and then the regulators take appropriate enforcement action. That whole industry has been criticized as something known as the censorship industrial complex. I think that term was coined by either Mike Benz or Mike Schellenberger, one or the other. And essentially it's a group of private organizations that work with government entities, used to work with the United States under the Biden administration, but under the new management no longer do so. And so they've sanctioned a number of those individuals, barring them from entering the United States. One in particular, Imran Ahmed, runs an organization called the Center for Countering Digital Hate. He's based out of DC. He's brought a First Amendment challenge against that decision because, interestingly, CCDH actually has a bit of a history with this. They were sued by X a couple of years ago for allegedly violating their terms of service.
Wait, what does that mean, violate terms of service? What did they specifically do?
And basically, they sought and secured dismissal of that lawsuit on the basis that their activities were protected speech, because you can advocate for censorship, right? That is allowed under the First Amendment. Now, there's an interesting interplay there between, the basically plenary authority that the United States exercises to decide who can stay and remain in the country and who has to leave and when. So that's going to be some very interesting litigation from a legal standpoint. But I think those individuals who are not in the United States, there's fairly strong grounds that they're going to remain outside of the United States. And of course, Europe absolutely went bananas and totally lost it over this.
It was so funny to watch them losing their mind because some of these people have, like, aggressively advocated for censorship for years. And now they're, like, losing their minds that, yeah, the United States is doing this.
Yeah, not according to the article that you showed us earlier. Also, not for nothing, but you literally have tweets hidden, or, like, you made it so that people can't tweet to you at all on Twitter. So you advocate for free speech, but not when people can reply to you. So I think that's a little bit of cognitive dissonance from Ms. Taylor Lorenz.
I think what Europe doesn't understand yet is I think that was not the payload. That was a warning shot. What Congress is working on is going to be the payload. And if they don't like that 5 NGO activists got censored, I think the U.S. Department of State certainly has a lot more powder that they've kept dry, and this should be viewed really as the fact that everyone went so apoplectic. These people aren't even they're not even government officials, right? But the taboo that was broken was that for a long time, the entire European censorship apparatus, and much indeed of the European internet regulatory apparatus, including the GDPR, was predicated on the assumption that the American government would never say no and turn around and decide to reassert its sovereignty at its digital border.
That makes sense.
And the minute that the United States does this, the entire European regulatory project, which the Europeans, they sometimes describe themselves as a quote-unquote regulatory superpower, that project falls apart because ultimately law is itself a local phenomenon, right? It exists within borders. That has been the case since the Peace of Westphalia for the last 400 years, right? So that is a fundamental operating assumption. And so a lot of these digital regulations they were building kind of assumed that they would be able to override that basic assumption because everyone was just trying to get along and playing nice. While the question of this old rule, like 60, 70 years, no one's ever answered the question, who gets to write the rules of the road for the internet? And the fact that the US has now pushed back means that, I think there's a conceivable answer, which is that each country writes its own rules. And that is not something that the European regulatory order can survive.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a conversation to have about the US when it comes to catching up on laws. They are pretty slow to catch up on a lot of laws. I mean, if you look at like AI, for example, we're not going to be getting regulations on that. Certainly not in this current administration with Trump. If anything, Trump is trying to like filibuster it as much as possible. And same when it comes to like age of consent laws. Like in some states, it's still 16 and 17, which like we definitely need to change as well. But I mean, like stuff like that, where it's like we need to like get up to date with some of these laws and like actually implementing systems where it should be where it's at. And again, like the US legal system is far from perfect when you try to like pass laws because you have to go through 3 different branches, which in some cases is good because you don't want someone like Trump implementing like really terrible and horrific fucking laws, which is already happening now. But also, like, it's not so great when we try to implement things and catch up to speed when it comes to, like, AI or, like, censorship in this case or, like, fucking age of consent laws.
Yeah, it feels like what the EU is doing, it reminds me of a lot of what we see here in America, too, where you see states like Utah taking this really like activist approach with tech regulation and censorship laws, where they sort of tried to pass their Social Media Regulation Act, which was overturned, obviously. But I don't know.
That's not quite what happened. What happened was that it was successful initially, but it never really went anywhere from the sound of it. I just think that's important context because Taylor always tries to sensationalize in little details that she squeezes in.
Always up to something, sort of trying to push these laws that then have like a ripple effect, I guess, on like how Meta or Google, these platforms, treats the rest of the country. And I feel like Europe has really even been outspoken about that and said like, we're gonna crack down on Meta. We're gonna do all this. You talked about on Twitter these sort of like 2 competing approaches for the internet. And I think you kind of just got into it a little bit, but there's this European approach, as you mentioned, where these nations are sort of harmonized and I guess these domestic censorship systems like all sort of work together. And then there's this alternative approach where you said where borders have meaning. Can you just elaborate a little bit on these 2 visions of the internet and kind of why they're all coming to a head right now?
Yeah, so they're all coming to a head because there's a fundamental structural mismatch between the way that the internet exists and the way that law works. If you see what a lot of the Europeans will say about, for example, my clients, right? People, they chime in all the time. They say your clients are operating in the UK because their websites are accessible there, right? And so therefore they have to obey UK law. And that's just not how the internet works. It's not that when you navigate to a website, suddenly like magic little elves transport the website to your computer. It's that you're calling a server far away and you're asking it to send you data on a massive distributed network of machines that's not located in any particular place, right? So it's a borderless creature and it lives in a world where borders are defined where rules apply. And so the Europeans, it's really the Anglosphere, right? Because I don't think anyone disputes that Russia and China have their own national internet ecosystems because they're willing to use really draconian powers and authorities to block websites that they think are just non-compliant or not conducive with their internal policies.
Well, yeah, I mean, Russia tries to spew massive disinformation campaigns and propaganda regarding its country, and you start to see that with, well, our current president. And then China almost has like the exact opposite problem that Russia has, where they suppress too much information. So you want to talk about censorship. China is definitely like at the top of the list when it comes to like censorship, as well as North Korea. But again, that's a whole different conversation.
Whereas the UK and Europe are traditionally quite open societies, where you do have, a long history of democracy. All of America's free speech ideals are ultimately European ones that were brought over and then implemented here. I mean, John Milton, right? He is the originator of free speech. He's English. That's why we have it, is because he came up with the idea, and that idea then evolved over time and was developed into political doctrine in the United States. So as the rest of the world has drifted away from that, they want to figure out a way where they can engage in censorship, but they don't have to give up the fiction that they're not engaging in censorship. And so unlike Russia, China, and those places, they've said, you know what we'll do? We'll come up with these duties, and then we're going to conscript the Americans to carry out those duties on our behalf, so we don't have to get our hands dirty doing the censorship ourselves, because that would be completely unacceptable politically to the societies which we govern. And that works as long as nobody in America calls your bluff. They attempted to enforce the OSA against 4 targets. Every single American target of that law refused. And these are tiny targets that have no reason for bravery, right? When they're up against a G7 nuclear-armed member state. And yet, they were so confident in the First Amendment and such believers in the idea that we had to defend the principle that they said, you know what, we're willing to be exposed to immense personal and corporate jeopardy in order to defend that principle for the entire country. And when state got involved, that just confirmed it's not just a bunch of fringe platforms that have called the UK's bluff here and the EU's bluff. It is the entire federal apparatus in Washington, D.C., which has done so. And so the alternative vision is that essentially you can enforce your laws over people who are on your soil. And if you're trying to govern conduct on American soil, if you have the power to do that, bully to you, good for you. But right now, the United States is the global superpower. And like it or not, the United States has the First Amendment, which means that, within its borders, there's an expectation that the United States and its citizens will be able to enjoy the full length and breadth of the First Amendment's protection of speech online. And now we have a federal government and a federal apparatus which is willing to use real hard power to defend it. So the difference is basically that the US approach, borders still have meaning, whereas the European approach was one where all of the countries that are not the United States, but within America's political orbit, said, you know what, we want to try to control what's going on in the United States for various economic and political reasons, that they may individually have, right? There are different reasons broadly between each of these countries, but overall, right, the objective is the same, which is to bring the American internet under the control of these other countries.
I doubt we're going to see any of the, I guess, like other countries like Russia or China be on par with this, because they're actively trying to push certain amounts of information, which can be a conflict of interest. And also this gets into a conversation about like spreading Western values when it comes to the United States of America, when it comes to freedom of speech. So like freedom of speech is like more of a Western and progressive idea. So I doubt that any of those countries would be willing to do it, but doesn't seem like our current administration cares too much about that. Hey y'all, I forgot to plug it in the video, which is why I'm editing this in a non-cohesive way. I am plugging my Iconosmist TikTok. Been trying to grow the TikTok as much as possible, so if you guys are not already following me there, what are you doing? Go follow me. The link is in the description. Or you can go on TikTok and search Iconosmist_. That should be me. You can watch TikToks about how confidence could be a potential placebo when it comes to relationships, or how this MAGA woman was literally saying Zoran Mamdani is a red flag and has massive cognitive dissonance throughout the entire TikTok. There's also some kick drama that I've covered. There's also a couple of Asmongold clips. There's a lot of exclusive stuff here that I don't cover in my long-form content. So what are you waiting for? Go on TikTok, search up Iconosmist_, or click the link in the description below to find my TikTok, and you guys should go follow me there. Been trying to grow the TikTok as much as possible. And yeah, that's about it.
Instead of the United States sole control.
And it's always framed as cracking down on big tech. And I think that that's just so popular politically across the spectrum, and in Europe and Australia and stuff. It's like there's a lot of this techlash happening. There's a lot of anger at these big social platforms. And so they claim, well, this is how we're cracking down on big tech. Obviously, we know that that's not the case. And as you said, I think it's so relevant too that the clients that you represent, 4chan, QB Farms and stuff, like I think they're indicative of actually a huge significant part of the web that is affected by these laws that is not big tech.
Well, as I said earlier in this video, it's kind of hard for me to feel sorry for 4chan and like Gob and all these other websites when they're responsible for a lot of disinformation and doxing campaigns. So I don't exactly have a lot of empathy for these websites.
That is not these big companies. I wrote for The Guardian when the Online Safety Act went into effect.
I don't know. If I was in charge of The Guardian, I certainly wouldn't want journalists like you hired there, considering journalists should care about credibility of news.
We saw Alcoholics Anonymous forums getting shut down, disability communities, like communities for young people to report abuse and learn about abuse. Like all of these things are shut down. And I think these have such ripple effects that people sort of don't understand because they think, oh, well, it's just the EU being tough on Meta or whatever.
The other thing to keep in mind is that it's politically very broad what's happening here. I mean, you and I, for example, you obviously have been a bigger deal online than I've been for a very long time. I think it is highly probable that personally we disagree on most things of a political nature. However, when it comes to free speech, as you said, I'm flattered that you learn things from my feed. I learn things from yours.
I think when Preston says disagree, I think he's specifically talking about maybe like being too far left. I don't know. I don't know this Preston guy personally, so I can't like say for certain. He doesn't strike me as like a conservative cum guzzler based on like the brief stuff that I looked up about him when I was like pausing the video.
And there was like zero daylight, right, between us on this issue. And if you look on the other side of the political spectrum, from the Gabs and the Kiwi Farms and the 4chans, Wikipedia is getting pushed around by the UK right now. Reddit is getting pushed around by Australia. Those are traditionally left-leaning forums. And so they're getting pushed around in a different way. Wikipedia decided to do a different strategy than we did. They went and sued in the High Court of England and Wales, decided to do it, on where the UK had the home field advantage, and they lost. But ultimately, the objective of the global project is all of American tech, right? It's not a political thing. It's not a partisan thing. It's not a culture war thing. It's that the UK and Europe want sovereign control over American infrastructure, regardless of the political orientation of that infrastructure, regardless of who runs it, regardless of what function it serves. They think it's in their national interest to control the servers that we run. And so this is something which really endangers everything in the United States, regardless of source. And you've seen that, for example, Blue Sky, right? Another prime example. They, I think, pulled out of Mississippi over Mississippi.
This one I can believe much more because Blue Sky is much more of a left-leaning platform. You could even argue it's more of a far-left platform than what it is to Twitter, which is a polar opposite at this point. But I can believe this more because, again, I'm going to keep going back to our current administration and how the right has the dominant narrative, and given that Mississippi is more of a red state, this doesn't surprise me in the least bit.
Mississippi's age verification law, and we're seeing other age verification laws start to get struck down in various places now. So this is something which affects everybody, regardless of where they are. And I think, and Substack, another example, the CEO of Substack wrote a great op-ed in the London Telegraph the other day, where he said, listen, this is a threat to free speech. Google, again, not exactly a bastion of conservative thinking, turned around and they said the Online Safety Act was a threat to freedom of speech. So what we've seen is that most American tech companies that deal with user-generated content at this point have seen enough about the OSA, whether they implemented it or whether they refused it. My client's strategy was refuse it outright, raise awareness, make as much noise as possible, and frankly, punch the censors on the nose and let them know that they weren't going to be able to get into the United States without opposition. But other companies now have implemented the act. They've figured out exactly what it's all about. And they said, you know what, we don't want this, right? This is anti-American. That's starting to emanate from the political left, which I find extremely encouraging. Because if we're going to beat this thing, we're going to need to get 60 votes in the Senate to do it.
Huh, okay, now I'm curious. Okay, I didn't even notice this post, but Preston Byrne posted Maduro's Venezuela forced the United States to act as one node among many, rather than as a unilateral sovereign. The longer Maduro remained, the more the United States was compelled to act through structures that limit it. Okay, so... And also, I noticed that Preston Byrne was following Nick Shirley on Twitter, who did, like, really awful disinformation and like terrible journalism, quote unquote journalism, in the whole Minnesota fraud thing. But like apparently I guess Preston Byrne is more of like a conservative cum guzzler, so I guess that is that's something I didn't even know throughout this video. I was a little bit sus on him originally. God, I really need to trust my fucking gut on people more. Because, like, I thought to myself throughout this coverage, okay, maybe I'm being a little bit too hard on Preston. Maybe I'm being a little bit too hard for no reason. Maybe he doesn't know that Taylor Lorenz is out for disinformation. Like, if you're going to fight for freedom of speech, then I feel like you should be fighting for... Maybe you should go after Donald Trump and his fucking administration who tried to arrest somebody or charge a fine on somebody for having a fucking pride flag on their desk. That's what Kash Patel tried to do, so I just don't know where the same energy is for that, but okay, dude. Alright, I guess I have to put everything else in this video that Preston said in question now.
I love the Substack. Of course, we love them, but they have been so silent on a lot of this. So I was really happy to see Chris's piece. I'm just curious kind of what you're seeing also domestically. Like you mentioned, I think that this should be something that anybody, this is like our basic sort of American values of free speech and free expression. But honestly, the left and the right in America seem very aligned on censorship. Like we're also seeing in the Senate these efforts very much led by the Democrats.
Not really. I mean, like I said, Trump's administration tried to arrest someone in the FBI for having a pride flag on their desk. And they also were planning on arresting people for burning the American flag. And that's a form of freedom of speech. We're seeing the exact opposite under Trump, if anything, but instead of going after them, Taylor Lorenz just spends all her time going after people who aren't far left enough.
I would say to repeal Section 230 or, to pass things like COSA, which again is very led by the Democrats, but you also have Marsha Blackburn and a bunch of Republicans on there. I mean, Spencer Cox in Utah, there seems to be a lot of like bipartisan support for censorship, and these laws that you're relying on to kind of like fight censorship abroad could even be dismantled here at home.
Trump is an active threat to freedom of speech, and instead of going after Trump and the shit that he's been doing, especially with the whole Jimmy Kimmel stuff that happened earlier this year, instead of going after Trump, you decided to bring on some random fucking right-wing person onto your show or whatever and like try to run this narrative that, oh, we're actually more aligned if anything, but not if you're aren't far left enough. Like, shut the fuck up with this narrative.
And so I guess, like, what do you make of those sort of domestic efforts to sort of censor content?
We are fortunate that we have a sort of 800-pound gorillas in the form of FIRE and NetChoice and other advocacy organizations, which are extremely formidable litigation shops, which are getting some of these laws struck down right and left. I think last week, NetChoice got one age verification law struck down in Louisiana, and then they got a preliminary injunction against another UK Online Safety Act style content law in Arkansas. So fortunately, because we have the First Amendment here, it's possible to fight back, right? And those fights are ongoing, and the shops that are doing that are very capable of fighting and winning. So I'm actually pretty optimistic. Part of my hope with the foreign censorship process is that by looking at what the UK and the EU have done, we can illustrate for those on both sides of the aisle, to be frank, that we don't want to copy that approach here in the United States. I think in the US, a lot of the campaigning for these censorship laws is very emotionally driven, and it's very difficult to say no to, because you turn around and you say, oh, my child looked at this website and then my child died, right? Something like that. And what politician isn't going to turn around and be sympathetic to that? Because, this website obviously was responsible, even though in most cases, practically all of them, they're not. So I think with the sovereignty fight and the sovereignty angle, we have an opportunity to basically say to American legislators, listen, you're only seeing a very narrow sliver, a very narrow piece of the picture that's being presented to you by people who have very narrow interests. And those interests are very frequently very closely tied to corporate interests that want to introduce age verification, for example, or other political interests that are just generally pro-censorship and don't want the internet to function the way that it has. So I think that the foreign censorship fight offers an opportunity to educate those individuals and also to reframe the discussion and remind everybody what it means to be American and what free speech actually means.
It's certainly not American to be supporting somebody who was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein for 15 years and is probably a pedophile himself, but I digress.
Right, and it means, if nothing else, it means the right to express things that people don't want to hear. Even if there's a very emotional appeal that thing should not be heard, we have no business intruding on people's right to do so. So I think the tide is turning. I think that with the fight back with foreign censorship, I think the EU and UK, to be blunt, I think they're going to lose. I don't see any world in which the EU DSA and the UK OSA really become operative for the vast majority of American companies. There might be some companies with large EU or UK footprints. For example, Google and Facebook have enormous campuses in downtown London. I don't think you're going to be seeing them making any arguments anytime soon that they don't operate in the United Kingdom or pulling out of the UK and getting their operations out of there. But for most American companies, I don't think the UK Online Safety Act is going to be a problem for them, because I think we're going to respond very robustly and we're going to redraw a red line around our sovereign boundary and dare the UK to cross it again, and I don't think they will. So for the larger companies, you might still see that. Ultimately, that compliance might be voluntary. I think they would do it anyway, just because it's in Google and Facebook and X's business interests to engage in some censorship or content moderation on their own, simply to avoid the political heat that comes with hosting stuff that's too controversial.
I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Twitter hardly censors anything. Quite the opposite. White supremacists and far-right freaks are absolutely profuse on there.
That most of their user bases find revolting and offensive, right? So that's why they do that, because it's good for business. And I think that good for business approach ultimately is pretty closely aligned with what a lot of the UK Online Safety Act does. However, the UK Online Safety Act goes a little bit further, and it says it's compulsory that you have to do all this, and there are fines and there are criminal procedures, and because of all that, this potential process is open to political interference by our government to compel outcomes on American servers that Americans wouldn't otherwise do themselves. You see UK politicians right, left, and center calling for Elon Musk to be jailed, for X to be seized, for X to be blocked, all this other sort of stuff, because the CEO of that company, Mr. Musk, has engaged in political speech that is disliked in the UK. And the danger, right, of having
He's also given Nazi salutes at Trump rallies and inaugurations. We got to remember that too. I would imagine that somebody would be disliked for throwing out Nazi salutes.
Censorship law, which is enforceable against the company, is that they will use that censorship law for political ends. They say that they won't, right? But I just have zero confidence that that's the case.
I mean, I think they already, there's so much soft pressure already. I'm working on a project right now on meta censorship stuff, and they proactively censor so much based on what they believe regulators or people in power will like. And I think that's a huge problem as well. And it's almost even more problematic because there's not even oversight, because they're not necessarily following a law. This is one thing that I think actually was good when Trump came to power, is that Meta started to roll back some of this aggressive censorship with their community guidelines violations.
Great. Now we're giving positive sentiment to Trump as somebody who's supposed to be on the left. But only people who aren't far left enough are the real problematic ones, according to Taylor Lorenz here.
And stuff that they were doling out.
One thing that I think most people don't fully appreciate is that when you have these really punitive European censorship regimes looming over these companies, they have a huge amount of incentive to police American speech anyway, as just a general global principle, right? So just like with Section 230, it's one of those things which sits at the base of the internet, and it's a basic operating assumption. And your average internet user, when you're scrolling through Twitter or Facebook, you don't see Section 230. You're not going through it and going, oh yes, there's a direct chain of causation between Section 230 and this particular piece of content, and I can identify that it's there. So I think if we manage to rebuild the perimeter again, erect a barrier between the United States and the rest of the world's regulators, where we say, listen, Americans don't have to obey these rules, and here's some confirmation, some hard confirmation that that's the case, I think what we'll wind up seeing is that the domestic internet experience in the US will become freer as a consequence of that. Because at the moment, we have all of these automated systems that are tuned to the European censorship rules, because all of these companies have been building their compliance apparatuses, preparing for this for the last 5 years. And if you can confirm, listen, that censorship apparatus doesn't get into the United States, that's going to change what discourse happens in the United States. Because companies, generally speaking, they don't turn around and say, well, we're going to have one content moderation policy for the US and a different one for the UK. They'll just standardize, and they'll say, listen, this is our code, these are our standard procedures. And we'll see, in hindsight, the extent to which these foreign regimes were actually affecting our domestic speech here in the United States. But it's hard to do now because it's buried so deep in the stack, and it's all automated, and it's been through multiple layers of abstraction and reinterpretation and legal things and various other stuff, that it's really difficult to pinpoint exactly what the impact has been on American speech as a result of these foreign rules. So hopefully what we'll be able to do is beat this thing back and repel it, and then once we do that, the internet will start liberalizing again. I know particularly sex positive content in particular is something which on the political left has long been a problem. It started with Fosta Sesta, which basically killed Tumblr, for example. And then you see this stuff with adult content age gating, and you're like, all right, well, there's adult content on Wikipedia, right? So what about that?
Love how we're advocating for the censorship of sex positive content. Meanwhile, you have Preston, who is a huge Trump supporter, and the administration Trump has had has arrested people for burning an American flag or fired somebody with a pride flag on their desk. Great consistency of values.
We're going to have to age gate Wikipedia next. There's LGBTQ content all over the place.
Who cares? Do you think that's a bad thing?
I think a lot of leftists have started, as somebody that's cared about this for a long time, and I think it was really hard, especially after.
Great. I love how we're not going to give pushback to Preston, who literally just insinuated that having LGBTQ content all over the place is something that kids can't watch. Taylor, he literally just dog whistled. that's a form of grooming kids. Because that's literally the insinuation. When he advocates for sex-positive content and the freedom of speech of it being all over the place, he lumped in someone's identity as a result of that. So, wow, Taylor's not even going to push back against that when you think she would as a left person.
Like in that first Trump era, like free speech got so coded to the right where like if you said free speech, you're like, oh, you MAGA now or whatever. But I think Palestine really changed people's perceptions. Like I think that was the first time a lot of these leftists started to really realize that this like censorship was bad, and also that we don't want the government determining like what is and isn't, like misinformation around things, like just foreign policy questions and everything. So
you don't give a fuck about that. You lie all the time when it comes to your portrayal of information on shit.
I'm hopeful that it can sort of become a thing, but you're a lot more optimistic than me about the domestic stuff. But maybe I'm just like doomer pilled. I'm like, oh my God, the massive amount of money that goes into funding moral panic nonsense content is just insane. I talked to somebody that has like less than 10,000 YouTube subscribers and got, offered tens of thousands of dollars to make one of these stupid series about how, cell phones are killing people and all this stuff. And so I think we're up against a big propaganda campaign against speech.
Yeah, but I think I see how much counter speech there is on this now, particularly that the U.S. federal government's getting involved. And, it'll be interesting to see what Europe does in response. You can always rely on the European Union and the United Kingdom to do the wrong thing when it comes to a major sovereignty fight with the United States. See, for example, the Suez crisis. I think that they still don't fully understand, and that's fine that they don't understand, but having been involved in this directly for a long time, I don't think they understand how sure the Americans are of our position and how certain we are that the Europeans need to be defeated on this one. And that's why I think they timed the fine of X, right? The European Commission fined X 120 million euros on December the 4th. I think they timed that because they assumed that would be the opening shot and that there wouldn't be a coordinated response pulled together in time for the midterm elections. The Republicans would then lose the House and then nothing would happen. I think, that was a mistake. I think that the Trump administration and the House GOP caucus started working on this immediately as soon as he was inaugurated. And so we're really, I think we're a year ahead of where the Europeans thought we would be. And so as a consequence, there's a very good chance that we can pull something together from a statutory perspective that will make it extremely difficult for the Europeans to attempt to do what they've done so far, to do that again.
All right, Preston. Well, I'm rooting for you and your fight. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Great to meet you.
All right, that's it for this week's episode of Free Speech Friday.
Free Disinformation Friday, baby.
If you like the show, please support me on Patreon via the link below. You can also buy a paid subscription to my tech and online culture newsletter, usermag.co. That's usermag.co. Or you can get my newsletter on Patreon, where I also do bonus episodes once a month, monthly Q&A live streams, a bi-weekly newsletter of everything that I'm reading and seeing online, and more. This probably doesn't surprise you, but talking about these topics makes it extremely hard to get advertisers. I'm 100% independent. I'm not funded by any weird dark money groups, political causes.
Oh yeah, the dark money groups that you completely lied about, saying that the Democrats were mainly responsible for it, despite the fact that Democrats have tried to get rid of dark money groups, but Republicans have done everything they can to keep dark money groups. Yeah, those ones. Yeah. Love the disinformation, but okay.
Or anything. I am 100% funded by people like you. And the only reason I can continue this series and continue to create the content that I do is because of support from people like you. So any amount that you can spare makes such a huge difference. You can go to usermag.co, that's usermag.co, and support me via Substack or on Patreon via the link below. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.
Well, it certainly was a Taylor Lorenz video, I guess.